She woke up before sunrise, the cold morning air cutting through the thin blanket she had. The alley where she slept was quiet, except for the occasional sound of distant traffic and the murmur of early risers on the street. Her stomach ached, but she forced herself to sit up and shake off the sleepiness. Another day had begun, another day of hoping for something to change, another day of surviving. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders and started walking toward the main street. The city was waking up slowly. Shopkeepers were opening their stores, the smell of fresh bread and coffee drifting through the streets. People hurried past her, most too absorbed in their own lives to notice a girl standing in the cold. She lowered her gaze, trying not to feel invisible, but she had learned long ago that being unnoticed was safer than being ignored rudely. She stopped near the corner where the traffic light shone red, hoping someone would notice her. In her hand, she held a small, tattered paper bag. It had been her makeshift bag for months. Inside were a few coins she had collected, a small piece of cloth to wipe her hands, and a hope that today would be different. She watched as businessmen in neat suits hurried past, mothers holding their children tightly, delivery workers balancing boxes on their shoulders. She swallowed the lump in her throat and took a deep breath. "Spare food, please?" she asked quietly, holding her hand out toward a passing man. He barely looked at her, muttering something under his breath as he walked faster. She nodded politely and lowered her hand. It hurt sometimes being treated like she wasn't even there, but she had learned to keep her dignity. She moved along the street, her eyes scanning the tables outside cafes and restaurants. Some customers had leftover food, but no one seemed willing to part with it. Sometimes a kind hand would push a small sandwich her way. Sometimes a harsh voice would tell her to leave. Each time she smiled and thanked them, no matter how small or bitter the moment felt. It had not always been this way. She remembered the warmth of a home she had once known, the laughter she had shared with her family, the small moments of comfort that now seemed like distant dreams. When her parents passed away, she had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. The shelters were crowded and the city was unforgiving, but she refused to give up. She refused to let the hardships change the person she was inside. Her day was filled with small routines. She would visit a bakery at dawn, hoping the baker would spare a piece of bread. She would check the market for vegetables that were about to be thrown away, and she would sometimes sit by the river for a few quiet moments, letting the gentle flow calm her restless mind. Every step she took, every small success she had in finding food or earning a few coins was a victory she celebrated quietly to herself. On this particular day, the city felt heavier than usual. The sky was gray and the wind bit through her thin coat with unusual sharpness. She shivered and pressed forward, reminding herself that every person she asked for help was a chance to survive another day. She walked past a busy intersection and noticed a man sitting outside a cafe, eating his breakfast alone. She approached him carefully, her voice barely above a whisper. "Spare food, please?" The man looked at her briefly and shook his head. She smiled politely and stepped back, trying not to feel discouraged. She knew that not everyone could help, and that was okay. She moved on, her steps light but steady, her mind thinking of her next move. She passed a group of children laughing and playing with a small ball. She watched them for a moment, their carefree joy a stark contrast to her own life. She felt a pang of longing, but quickly pushed it aside. She had learned to find small moments of happiness wherever she could. The smile of a stranger, the warmth of a cup of tea offered by a kind hand, the soft glow of the morning sun on the buildings, these were her treasures now. By mid-morning, her stomach was aching more sharply, and she had only managed a small piece of bread from a kind woman at the market. She sat down on a bench near a fountain, trying to rest and gather her energy. The sound of water splashing lightly against the stone was soothing, and she closed her eyes for a few minutes. She thought of her parents, of the life she had lost, and of the life she still hoped to build. Her heart ached with the weight of her dreams, but she refused to let despair take hold. A homeless dog wandered nearby, sniffing around for scraps. She reached into her small bag and pulled out a tiny piece of bread, breaking it into smaller pieces and offering it to the dog. Its eyes lit up and it wagged its tail hesitantly before eating. She smiled softly, feeling a small spark of connection with another living being. In a world where kindness was scarce, she held on to these small acts like precious gems. The afternoon brought new challenges. The streets grew busier, and people seemed even more focused on their own lives. She asked politely at a few restaurants for leftover food, only to be met with refusal or dismissive glances. She remained calm, her voice steady, her eyes gentle. There was strength in her quiet persistence, and she knew it. She refused to beg aggressively or lose her dignity, even if it meant going hungry. As the day wore on, she moved toward the wealthier part of the city. The buildings were taller, the streets cleaner, and the people more hurried. She knew that chances here were different. Some people might be kind, others might be cruel. But she had learned to take each interaction as it came. She walked slowly, observing the people around her, looking for anyone who might spare a moment, a smile, or a piece of food. Near the entrance of a high-end cafe, she saw a man standing alone, dressed in an elegant suit. He seemed different from the others she had approached. There was a certain presence about him, a calmness that made him stand out in the crowd. She hesitated, unsure if she should approach, but her stomach urged her forward. Taking a deep breath, she stepped closer and spoke softly. "Spare food, sir?" The man looked down at her, his eyes meeting hers. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. She felt a strange sense of connection, a warmth she had not felt in a long time. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he studied her with quiet attention, as if trying to understand the story behind her eyes. She waited patiently, holding her gaze steady, her hands folded calmly. She could feel the cold wind on her face, the murmurs of people passing by, but she focused on him. In that brief moment, something shifted, though neither of them realized it yet. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small sandwich, offering it to her. She accepted it with both hands, her eyes lighting up with genuine gratitude. She thanked him softly, not rushing away, feeling the kindness in his gesture. For the first time that day, she felt seen, not just as someone asking for food, but as a person with hopes, struggles, and dignity. The man smiled faintly, a small flicker of something like recognition in his eyes. He did not know why, but he felt drawn to her honesty, her courage, and the way she carried herself despite everything she had endured. She ate a few bites of the sandwich, savoring it slowly, and then spoke softly, telling him about her day, her struggles, and her dreams. He listened quietly, not interrupting, simply letting her voice fill the space between them. When she finished, she bowed slightly and started to move on, but he called out to her, asking her name. She paused, surprised, and then told him. He nodded, as if committing it to memory, and said something simple but kind, that he hoped her day would get better, that she should hold on to hope. She smiled and continued down the street, feeling a warmth in her chest she had not felt in a long time. The sun began to set, casting long shadows on the buildings. She found a quiet spot near the river and sat down, reflecting on the day. It had been difficult as usual, but there had been a spark of hope, a reminder that kindness could still exist in the world. She held on to that moment, cherishing it quietly, knowing that tomorrow she would wake up and do it all over again, but now with a little more courage, a little more hope. As the night fell, she curled up in her small blanket in the alley where she slept. The city lights flickered and the distant sounds of traffic lulled her into a light sleep. She dreamed not of wealth or luxury, but of a life where small acts of kindness could change everything, where people would see her for who she was, not just for what she lacked. She dreamed of a day when survival would no longer be a struggle, and when hope would not feel so fragile. And somewhere in the city, the man in the elegant suit thought about the girl he had met, the honesty in her eyes and the quiet strength she carried. Unbeknownst to him, their encounter had planted a seed, a possibility that life could surprise both of them in ways neither had expected. The next morning, she woke with the faint light of dawn spilling through the cracks of the alley. Her blanket was thin, but it had kept her warm enough to sleep, and for that she was grateful. She rubbed her eyes and sat up slowly, thinking about the day before. The man in the suit lingered in her mind. His eyes, calm and steady, had held something she rarely saw in strangers. A recognition of her as a person, not just someone asking for help. She shook her head slightly, trying to push the thought away. She had no reason to expect anything to come from that brief encounter. Life had taught her not to hope for miracles. But even as she moved through the familiar streets, she couldn't stop thinking about him. She walked toward the bakery first, hoping for a few pieces of leftover bread. The baker, a kind woman with gentle eyes, smiled when she saw her. "Back again so early?" she asked, handing over a small loaf. "I saved this for you." She thanked her quietly, holding the bread close, feeling its warmth against her fingers. With breakfast in her bag, she continued along her usual path. The streets were busier now, the sounds of cars honking and footsteps mixing into a constant hum. She passed people who barely glanced her way, some staring, others avoiding eye contact entirely. She had grown accustomed to being invisible in the crowd, yet she moved with purpose, knowing that every step was a chance to survive. Mid-morning brought a small rain, soft at first, then heavier as clouds gathered above. She opened the worn hood of her coat and continued walking, the rain soaking her shoes. She ducked under the awning of a closed shop, shaking her coat and watching the droplets fall. Hunger gnawed at her again, reminding her of how fragile her days were. She ate a small piece of bread, savoring it slowly, letting herself enjoy the warmth it gave her stomach. By late morning, she reached the busy plaza where street vendors sold fruit and small meals. She wandered among them, asking politely for anything they might spare. Most shook their heads, too preoccupied with their own work to notice her. A few tossed her a small orange or a handful of nuts, which she accepted with a soft smile. Every small act of kindness was like a candle in the darkness, keeping her hope alive. As she was leaving the plaza, she noticed a familiar face in the crowd. It was the man in the suit. He was speaking with someone, gesturing with his hands, but the moment he saw her, he stopped. Their eyes met again, and for a heartbeat the world seemed to pause around them. She felt a flutter in her chest, something she hadn't felt in a long time. He was real, not just a fleeting figure in her memory. He approached her slowly, keeping his distance, but his presence made her heart race. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm and steady. She nodded, unsure what to say. She had learned not to expect much from strangers, and yet here he was, looking directly at her as if she mattered. "I was hoping to see you again," he said quietly. "I wanted to make sure you were all right." She blinked, surprised. No one had ever asked her something like that before. Usually people avoided her, pushed her away, or ignored her entirely. His words felt strange, almost like a gift. I'm okay," she said softly, not wanting to seem weak, not wanting to give too much away. But she couldn't hide the truth entirely. Her eyes betrayed the hunger, the cold, and the constant worry that came with each day. He seemed to see it, yet there was no judgment in his gaze, only concern. He handed her a small package, neatly wrapped. She opened it to find a simple meal inside: bread, cheese, fruit. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded, a faint smile on his lips. "Eat slowly," he said. "Take your time. Don't rush." They walked together for a few steps, not speaking much, just sharing the quiet of the morning. It was unusual for her to walk beside someone willingly, but there was something about him that felt safe. He didn't pity her. He didn't talk down to her. And he didn't make her feel like an intruder in his life. That was rare, almost unheard of. He asked her about her day, and she told him a little, keeping her voice gentle. She spoke of small triumphs, finding leftover food, helping a stray dog, getting a smile from someone, and small disappointments, people who turned away, hunger that gnawed at her stomach, cold nights in the alley. He listened quietly, nodding occasionally, not interrupting, not offering empty words. There was a sincerity in his attention that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. After a while, he suggested they sit for a moment. They found a bench in the plaza, slightly away from the busiest crowd. She sat, holding her small meal carefully. He remained standing, watching her, and for the first time, she realized he might genuinely care about her well-being. She felt a mix of fear and hope. She had been hurt before, ignored, overlooked, and sometimes mistreated. Could she trust someone so quickly? Her instincts told her to be cautious, yet her heart, weary and tired, yearned for kindness. They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the city go by. The people rushing past seemed to belong to another world, a world that had never paused to notice her. But here on this bench, in this brief moment, she felt like someone mattered. He finally spoke again, softly. "You have a strength in you," he said. "I don't know your story, but I can see it. You've survived much, and yet you still carry yourself with dignity." She looked down, unsure how to respond. No one had ever said that to her before. Most people only saw her as someone struggling, someone to be ignored or helped briefly before moving on. This was different. She felt a warmth spread in her chest, a flicker of hope she had almost forgotten. As they talked, he mentioned a small opportunity. It wasn't much, just a chance to help her in a practical way. Some work at a nearby community center, small tasks for a few coins, maybe even a meal in exchange for her effort. It wasn't charity in the way she expected. It was a chance to take part, to contribute, to regain some control over her life. She listened, hesitant but intrigued. She had been offered help before, but it had always felt hollow or patronizing. This felt different. They agreed that she would visit the community center later in the day. She left the plaza feeling a strange mixture of excitement and nervousness. Her stomach was still hungry, but her mind felt lighter. For the first time in a long time, she felt the possibility of change, of stepping out of the cycle of survival into something more tangible. The community center was a modest building, tucked between taller structures. When she arrived, she was greeted warmly by the staff who explained the small tasks she could do. She spent the afternoon helping with organizing supplies, tidying up spaces, and assisting others who came for food or support. It was hard work, but it was honest work. She felt pride in her effort, a sense of contribution she had almost forgotten existed. During breaks, she sat quietly eating the meal provided, thinking about the man who had introduced her to this opportunity. His kindness had opened a door she hadn't known existed, and she was determined to make the most of it. She didn't know what the future held, but she had hope, and that hope felt strong and real. By evening, she returned to her usual alley, tired but satisfied. The day had been difficult, as all days were, but it had also been filled with unexpected kindness and a chance to regain a little control over her life. She curled up in her blanket, feeling the warmth of the day linger in her body. The city was quiet now, with only distant sounds echoing through the streets. As she drifted off to sleep, she thought about the stranger in the suit, about his calm eyes and his genuine concern. She didn't know why he had noticed her, why he had taken a moment to care, but she was grateful. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine a future where small miracles could happen, where people could see her for who she truly was, not just for the hardships she endured. Somewhere else in the city, the man reflected on their meeting as well. He thought about the courage it took to ask for help, the dignity she carried despite her struggles, and the strength he sensed in her eyes. He didn't know what the future held either, but he felt a pull to be part of something bigger than himself, to help in a way that was meaningful, not just transactional. The night stretched on, and both of them in their separate worlds carried the memory of that encounter. It was a quiet, small miracle, but one that neither would forget. For her, it was a spark of hope that could light the path forward. For him, it was a reminder that kindness and human connection could touch even the busiest, most guarded hearts. The days that followed promised more challenges, but she faced them with a renewed sense of determination. Each meal, each small task, each moment of human connection built her strength. And through it all, she carried the memory of the stranger who had paused, who had seen her, who had offered her more than food. He had offered her recognition, respect, and a glimpse of possibility. And in the city that had always felt harsh and uncaring, a small story of courage, kindness, and unexpected connection began to unfold, quietly, steadily, and profoundly. She woke early, her body sore from the work at the community center the day before, but her mind buzzing with determination. Today felt different. There was a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in a long time. She wrapped her thin coat tightly around herself, the cold air nipping at her cheeks, and stepped out into the quiet streets. The city was just beginning to stir, the soft hum of morning traffic blending with the distant voices of vendors setting up their stalls. Her first stop was the bakery. The baker greeted her with a warm smile and handed her a small loaf of bread, still warm from the oven. She thanked the baker softly, clutching the bread like a small treasure. The taste of it, fresh and comforting, filled her stomach and her heart in a way that had been missing for a long time. She walked on, careful to keep her coat snug, her eyes scanning the streets for opportunities, for any sign of kindness, or even just for a place to rest her weary feet. As she walked, she noticed people rushing past, heads down, eyes fixed on their phones or the path ahead. She moved quietly among them, a small figure in a bustling world, but there was a confidence in her steps now. She had a plan. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was beginning to navigate life with small, deliberate choices. Every interaction, every task she completed at the community center, Every kind word she received added a brick to the foundation of something she had only dreamed about before. By mid-morning, she was near the plaza, where vendors sold fruit, vegetables, and small meals. She approached them politely, asking for what might be spared. Some shook their heads, absorbed in their own worries, but a few smiled and offered small portions, trusting her sincerity. She thanked each of them gently, savoring the tiny victories that allowed her to continue the day without fear of going hungry. Then she saw him, the man from the plaza, the one in the elegant suit. He was walking briskly, his eyes scanning the crowd, but when he noticed her, his pace slowed and a small smile appeared on his face. She felt her chest tighten. She hadn't expected to see him again so soon. He approached her, careful not to startle, and greeted her with the same calm, steady voice that had made her feel seen the first time. "Good morning," he said, his gaze soft but attentive. "How have you been since we last met?" She hesitated for a moment, then replied softly, describing the small victories and struggles she had faced. He listened quietly, nodding, offering no judgment, just a genuine presence that made her feel both grounded and valued. He handed her a small package, a simple breakfast, and watched as she accepted it with gratitude, her eyes meeting his for a brief, unspoken connection. The day unfolded in a series of small steps that felt monumental. She returned to the community center, completing tasks with growing confidence. She arranged supplies, cleaned areas that had been overlooked, and assisted others who came seeking food or guidance. Every act, no matter how minor, brought her a sense of accomplishment. The work was hard, but it reminded her that her effort had value, that she was capable of contributing something meaningful to the world around her. During a short break, she sat quietly on a bench outside, eating a small meal and watching the people pass. She noticed a young boy struggling to carry a heavy bag of groceries. Without thinking, she stood and offered to help him. He looked up at her, surprised, but accepted her assistance gratefully. Together, they carried the groceries to a nearby apartment building. The boy's mother thanked her, her smile warm and genuine, and the girl felt a flicker of pride she hadn't known she could feel. Later, the man in the suit returned, as if drawn by an unseen thread. He had a few minutes to spare, and walked with her through the plaza, speaking softly about the work at the community center and the small opportunities that could grow into something more substantial. She listened intently, absorbing every word. He spoke not as someone giving orders or pitying her, but as someone offering guidance, a steady hand in the chaos of her life. They stopped near a small fountain, the sound of water splashing lightly against the stone creating a quiet rhythm. He asked her about her dreams, not just the immediate goals of food and shelter, but her long-term hopes. She hesitated, unsure if she should speak, but something in his presence encouraged honesty. She told him about wanting a place to call home, a job that could sustain her, and a life where she didn't have to fear each day. He listened carefully, nodding. "Those are not small dreams," he said. "They are meaningful, and there is no reason you cannot reach them step by step." His words were simple, yet they carried weight. No one had ever spoken to her about her dreams as if they were real possibilities. For the first time, she began to believe that change could happen, that the future didn't have to be as grim as the past. The afternoon brought challenges as well. She helped at the community center with a sudden influx of visitors, each needing guidance, support, or a small meal. The work was exhausting, but she faced it with a resilience she hadn't known she possessed. Each person she assisted, each small smile she earned, reminded her that even in a harsh world, kindness could ripple outward. When the day ended, she left the community center with a sense of satisfaction. She had earned something more than just a meal. She had earned dignity, recognition, and a small measure of control over her life. She walked home slowly, the evening air cool against her skin. Her thoughts drifted to the man in the suit, to the opportunities he had introduced, and to the possibility that life could change in ways she had never imagined. She returned to her alley, laying down her blanket and settling in for the night. The city was quiet now, the lights casting soft glows on the wet streets. She closed her eyes, letting the exhaustion of the day wash over her, but her mind remained alert, replaying moments of kindness, of connection, of small victories. For the first time in a long while, she felt hope, not the fragile, fleeting hope she had clung to in the past, but a steady, growing flame that promised more than mere survival. In the days that followed, Her routine continued to blend struggle with opportunity. She became more involved at the community center, her tasks expanding as her confidence grew. The staff began to notice her dedication, praising her quietly for her persistence and kindness. She started to see herself not just as someone who needed help, but as someone capable of giving it, of making a difference in the small circle she inhabited. The man in the suit continued to check in on her, offering guidance and encouragement. Sometimes he brought small gestures of kindness, a warm meal, a note of encouragement, or advice on navigating the challenges of her daily life. She began to trust him, slowly, understanding that his presence was genuine, not transactional. His actions reinforced the idea that human connection could be real, that someone could care without expecting anything in return. Through all of this, she learned to balance caution with openness. The world had been harsh to her, and she knew better than to assume that every kindness was without motive. Yet she also learned that trust, when given carefully, could open doors that desperation alone could not. She began to plan small steps for her future, thinking about education, work, and a home of her own. Each idea felt like a seed planted, ready to grow if nurtured. One evening, after a particularly long day at the community center, she walked through the quiet streets with a small bag of food from the center. She paused near the plaza, looking at the fountain where she had first spoken with the man in the suit. The water reflected the city lights, and for a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a life different from the one she had known. She could feel change stirring, subtle but persistent, like the first rays of dawn pushing away the night. She returned to her alley, her body tired, but her spirit renewed. She curled up under her thin blanket, thinking about the small acts of kindness she had experienced, the work she had done, and the connection that had begun to form with someone who saw her as more than her circumstances. Sleep came slowly, but it was deeper, more peaceful than it had been in years. In the quiet of the night, she dreamed not of wealth or luxury, but of stability, respect, and the freedom to live without constant fear. She dreamed of days filled with purpose, where each step forward built on the last, and where kindness and effort could create real change. She dreamed of a life where she could give as well as receive, where her strength and perseverance were recognized and valued. And somewhere in the city, the man thought of her as well. He reflected on the courage it took to face each day, the resilience she carried, and the quiet determination that set her apart from others he had met. He realized that sometimes, small gestures could have profound impacts, that seeing someone truly, without judgment, could be the beginning of transformation. The days continued to pass, each filled with both challenges and small victories. She learned to navigate the city more confidently, to engage with others without fear, and to take pride in the work she completed. The community center became a place of growth, not just for her but for others who came seeking help. Her presence there, once just another person in need, now carried weight, respect, and inspiration. Through all of it, she remembered the first moment the man had looked into her eyes and seen her for who she truly was. That single act of recognition had sparked a series of events that began to change her life in ways she had only dreamed of. She understood now that miracles often came quietly, in moments of connection, in gestures of kindness, and in the courage to keep moving forward despite hardship. The city, which had once seemed cold and indifferent, began to feel different as well. She noticed small acts of kindness around her, the smiles of strangers, the willingness of others to help. She realized that change was not just about her own life improving, but about creating ripples that could touch many others. And as she lay down each night, wrapped in her thin blanket, she no longer feared the darkness. Instead, she carried hope in her heart, a growing confidence that life could be different, that people could be good, and that her future, however uncertain, held possibilities she had never dared to imagine. The morning was quiet and cold, the city just beginning to wake. She stood at the edge of the plaza, holding the small bag of food she had received from the community center. Today felt heavier than usual, yet lighter in a way she could not explain. She had learned to carry hope cautiously, as if it were fragile glass, but somehow it had grown inside her over the past weeks. The man in the suit had become more than a stranger. He was a guide, a silent supporter, someone who believed in her even when she had trouble believing in herself. She began her usual walk, passing the streets that had once felt like endless obstacles. She greeted familiar faces with quiet nods. Vendors smiled when they saw her, offering small scraps or pieces of fruit. Children waved at her as she passed, and she waved back, feeling a connection she had almost forgotten existed. The city still moved fast, still seemed indifferent, yet today it felt different. She felt seen, valued, and capable. By mid-morning, she reached the community center. She had taken on more responsibilities now, helping organize supplies, assisting newcomers, even teaching a few basic skills she had learned over the years. The staff had begun to rely on her, seeing not just a young woman in need but a dependable presence, someone who could inspire and guide others. She worked with a sense of purpose that filled her more than any meal ever could. During a break, she sat near the small fountain where she had first met the man in the suit. The sound of water splashing against the stone had become a comfort, a quiet rhythm that reminded her of steady progress. She took a deep breath, feeling the morning sun warm her face. It was in these small moments that she realized how far she had come, not in wealth, not in possessions, but in strength, resilience, and hope. Then she saw him, walking toward her with the familiar calmness. He greeted her with a gentle smile. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying the same quiet warmth she had grown to trust. She smiled back, feeling a strange mix of comfort and anticipation. He had become a presence she could rely on, a reminder that kindness and care were not fleeting. "I have something to show you today," he said, handing her a small envelope. She opened it cautiously, expecting another meal or note of encouragement. Instead, she found a letter introducing her to an opportunity, a small scholarship at a local training program that could teach skills she could use to find stable work. Her eyes widened and her hands trembled slightly as she held it. She had never imagined such a possibility. "This is real?" she asked softly, almost afraid to believe it. He nodded. "Yes, I think you have the potential to do great things. You've shown courage, persistence, and heart. This is a chance to build the future you've been dreaming of." Tears welled up in her eyes, not from sadness, but from a deep, overwhelming gratitude. She had survived countless hardships, faced hunger and cold, and yet here was an opportunity she had only ever imagined in fleeting dreams. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and whispered a quiet thank you. The days that followed were filled with preparation. She met with mentors from the program, learned new skills, and slowly began to imagine a life beyond survival. She felt nervous and excited at the same time, unsure if she was ready for such change, yet determined to make the most of it. Each task, each lesson, each small success gave her confidence. The fear she had carried for so long began to shrink, replaced by a quiet, steady belief in herself. Throughout this time, the man in the suit continued to check on her, offering advice, encouragement, and practical support. He never treated her as if she owed him anything. Instead, he celebrated her effort, her courage, and her growth. He reminded her that the future was something she could shape with her own hands, that the hardships she had endured had not defined her, but had strengthened her. One afternoon, she completed a project at the community center, a small garden where vegetables and herbs could be grown to feed those in need. She had worked tirelessly, planting seeds, tending soil, and guiding others who came to help. When she stepped back and looked at the thriving greenery, she felt a swell of pride. This garden was more than food. It was life, hope, and a tangible proof of her ability to create change. As she rested near the garden, the man joined her, nodding at the progress she had made. "You've done something remarkable," he said softly. She smiled, feeling the weight of his praise more deeply than she could explain. It wasn't just about the garden. It was about everything she had endured, everything she had overcome, and the promise of everything still to come. Evenings became moments of reflection. She returned to the alley only briefly, leaving her blanket behind for the first time in months, knowing she had a new place to sleep that was safe and warm. She allowed herself to dream of a home of her own, a life where she could plan meals, rest without fear, and build connections with people who cared about her for who she truly was. The fear that had shadowed her for years began to fade, replaced by hope and determination. Weeks passed and she continued to thrive. She learned to manage small budgets, gained practical skills through the training program, and began to see opportunities opening in ways she had never imagined. People at the community center admired her perseverance, her kindness, and her ability to inspire those around her. Children looked up to her, women sought her guidance, and even strangers smiled when they recognized her determination and warmth. The man in the suit remained a constant, not as a crutch but as a supportive presence. He encouraged her to take risks, to believe in herself, and to reach beyond what she thought possible. His belief in her never wavered, and slowly she began to internalize it herself. She realized that miracles were not always sudden or dramatic. Sometimes they were the accumulation of small, consistent acts of kindness, guidance, and courage. One day, she received news that she had been accepted into a program that could provide full training and a stipend while she learned a trade that would ensure stable employment. She could hardly believe it. The letter in her hands felt like a bridge between her past struggles and a future she had only dared to imagine. She thought of the days spent walking the streets searching for food, of the nights curled in her thin blanket, of the moments of kindness that had kept her hope alive, and she realized that every hardship had prepared her for this moment. Every act of perseverance had led her here. She shared the news with the man in the suit. His eyes lit up with pride and warmth. "You've earned this," he said simply. "All your effort, all your courage, it's led to this. Don't forget that your own strength brought you here." She smiled, feeling a deep gratitude that words could hardly express. The day she began the program, she walked with her head held high, her steps confident. She no longer felt invisible, no longer felt defined solely by her hardships. She carried with her the lessons of resilience, kindness, and hope, and she shared them quietly with those she met along the way. She helped newcomers at the center, guided children, and inspired others to believe that they too could overcome difficulties. Over time, her life transformed in ways she had never imagined. She gained stability, security, and independence. She found a small apartment, a space of her own where she could rest safely and dream freely. She continued to help at the community center, now as a volunteer and mentor, guiding others who were in the position she had once been. Each act of giving, each moment of teaching, reminded her that life was not just about survival, but about connection, impact, and leaving the world better than she had found it. The man in the suit remained in her life, a trusted friend and guide. But she also realized that the true miracle was not only in his kindness, it was in her ability to rise, to persevere, and to embrace opportunities when they appeared. She understood now that life's miracles often began with recognition, compassion, and a spark of belief in another person. One evening, as she walked through the city, she paused near the fountain where it had all started. The water sparkled under the streetlights, and she smiled quietly. She thought of how far she had come, from the cold streets and hunger to a life of stability and purpose. She realized that hope, once fragile, could grow strong if nurtured carefully. She remembered the kindness of strangers, the opportunities she had taken, and the courage she had found in herself. She sat quietly on the edge of the fountain, feeling the weight of gratitude in her heart. Life had been difficult, unpredictable, and at times cruel, but she had endured. She had discovered strength she didn't know she had, and she had learned that miracles were possible in small, steady ways. She had been seen, recognized, and supported, but she had also seen herself clearly for the first time. The city around her moved as always, busy and indifferent, yet she felt at peace. She had survived, grown, and transformed. The past no longer defined her. It had shaped her into someone resilient, kind, and capable, and she knew that no matter what challenges came next, she could face them with the courage and hope she had nurtured. That night, as she finally lay in her own small apartment, she felt a quiet joy she had never known. The journey had been long, but it had brought her to a place of stability, connection, and possibility. She thought of the man who had first noticed her, the kindness of strangers, and the community that had embraced her, and she realized that life, though unpredictable, was filled with moments of grace, courage, and miracles waiting to happen. And so, with hope as her guide, she closed her eyes, ready to face each new day, knowing that she was no longer just surviving, she was truly living. The morning air was crisp and carried the scent of fresh rain from the night before. She stepped out of her small apartment, her hands tucked into the pockets of her coat, and took a deep breath. Life had changed so much in the past months, yet each morning still felt like a gift. She had work to do at the community center, meetings for her training program, and small errands that now mattered more than they ever had before. Each day she moved with purpose, her steps steady and confident, a stark contrast to the timid, hungry girl she had once been. On her way to the center, she passed the plaza where she had first met the man in the suit. The fountain sparkled under the morning light, and she paused for a moment to look at it. Memories of their first encounter came rushing back. The hunger, the cold, the courage it had taken to ask for help, and the simple kindness that had started to change everything. She smiled softly, feeling the weight of gratitude fill her chest. That single moment of recognition had transformed her life in ways she was only beginning to understand. At the community center, she was greeted warmly by the staff and visitors alike. She had become more than a volunteer. She was now a mentor, guiding others who were struggling. Children sought her out for advice. Newcomers looked to her for reassurance, and the staff trusted her judgment. She found joy in helping others, a joy that went deeper than food or shelter. She understood what it meant to give, to share, and to make someone else feel seen and valued. The man in the suit arrived later that morning, his presence calm and steady as always. He had come to check on the new projects she had initiated, the improvements she had made, and the small but meaningful changes she had brought to the center. He listened attentively as she described her ideas for workshops, community events, and ways to involve more people in helping those in need. She spoke with a confidence she hadn't known before, her words clear and thoughtful, her passion evident. He smiled at her, a quiet approval in his eyes. "You've done incredible work," he said. "You've transformed not just the center but the people who come here. You're creating ripples that will spread far beyond what you can see right now." She felt a warmth in her chest, a mixture of pride and humility. She had worked hard, faced countless obstacles, and yet his words reminded her that her efforts mattered, that they had impact, and that her voice was powerful. The day passed in a blur of activity. She led workshops for newcomers, helping them learn basic skills, find employment opportunities, and regain a sense of dignity and independence. She listened to their stories, offered encouragement, and shared her own experiences in a way that was honest yet hopeful. She realized that her past hardships had given her empathy, understanding, and insight, qualities that no training or education could provide. People responded to her authenticity, to her willingness to be vulnerable yet strong at the same time. By late afternoon, she took a break outside the center. The streets were filled with the sounds of life, the chatter of children, the footsteps of busy commuters, the distant hum of traffic. She sat on a bench, letting the sun warm her face, and reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought of the cold streets, the nights of hunger, the moments of despair, and the small acts of kindness that had carried her forward. She realized that each hardship had prepared her for this life, had strengthened her resolve, and had shaped her into someone capable of facing challenges with courage. The man in the suit joined her on the bench. "You're growing into something remarkable," he said quietly. "Not because of what I've done, but because of your own strength and perseverance. You've learned to rise above, to keep going even when life seemed impossible." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting gratitude and understanding. "I couldn't have done it without your kindness," she admitted softly. He shook his head gently. "It wasn't just me. It was your courage that made the difference. I only helped you see what was already inside you." She felt a deep sense of clarity. For years, she had believed that survival was the only goal, that life was a series of obstacles to endure. Now she understood that life could be more than survival. It could be growth, connection, and the creation of meaning. She could take her experiences, the pain, the hunger, the fear, and transform them into something positive, something that could inspire and support others. That evening, after leaving the community center, she walked through the city streets with a lightness in her step. She passed the small shops, the cafes, and the familiar faces of people she had begun to recognize. The city, once a place of hardship and indifference, now felt alive with possibilities. Each interaction she had, each smile she shared, contributed to a sense of belonging she had never known before. She arrived at a local market where vendors were packing up for the day. One vendor, a woman who had once given her a small piece of bread without hesitation, waved her over. "I see you're doing well," the woman said. "It's good to see you thriving." She smiled, feeling a connection that transcended words. These small threads of community, woven through acts of kindness and shared understanding, had created a support network she had never imagined she could have. Later, she returned to her apartment, a modest space but hers, filled with warmth and the promise of stability. She unpacked a small package of food from the community center. Setting it neatly on the counter, she prepared a simple meal for herself, savoring each bite. Not out of desperation, but out of gratitude. The food nourished not just her body but her spirit. She thought of how far she had come, from the alleyways and hunger to a life where she had choices, control, and purpose. Her mind wandered to the man in the suit, whose presence had been a constant through this transformation. He had not simply given her food or money. He had given her belief, guidance, and respect. He had recognized her humanity when the world had often ignored it. She realized that his role in her life was not about charity. It was about helping her see her own potential and giving her the chance to step into it fully. As night fell, she sat by her window looking out at the city lights. The streets below were busy, yet she felt a quiet peace. The sounds that once seemed harsh and chaotic now felt like the pulse of life itself. She reflected on her journey, the hunger, the cold nights, the kindness of strangers, the opportunities at the community center, and the guidance of someone who had believed in her. Each experience had built upon the last, creating a story of resilience, courage, and hope. In the days that followed, she continued to thrive. She completed her training program, gaining skills that allowed her to find stable work. She became more involved in the community center, now taking a leadership role in organizing workshops and mentoring newcomers. Her life was no longer defined by survival alone. It was defined by growth, contribution, and connection. The man in the suit remained a supportive presence, but she no longer relied solely on him. She had learned to trust herself, to recognize her own strength, and to take initiative. She understood that miracles were not only acts of kindness from others, they were also the result of persistence, courage, and the willingness to embrace opportunity when it appeared. One afternoon, she walked through the plaza and paused by the fountain, watching the water dance in the sunlight. She thought of her past, of the long days and nights of struggle, and of the small moments of kindness that had carried her forward. She smiled, realizing that her life had transformed not through sudden fortune, but through steady effort, belief, and the connections she had nurtured. She remembered the words of the man in the suit. That strength and perseverance were what made her remarkable. She had seen it in herself now. She had faced fear, hunger, and uncertainty, and had emerged stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. She knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but she no longer feared them. She had the tools, the confidence, and the support to navigate whatever came next.